Hello, viewers! Now, it's no secret that I've loved playing through the Metal Gear series. Kojima's weirdness has brought us some true gems, and it's a classic running more than 20 years as a military thriller anime. However, even though Kojima gets a lot of leeway, his bosses have run the gamut from amazing to problematic to downright irredeemable. Today, we'll be looking at the worst 15 bosses of the Metal Gear series. Now, some rules. I'm taking entries from the entire series, even spin-offs. What I've chosen to cover for this are based entirely on my opinions only, and if you do like any of these guys, I think that's great that you could appreciate them in some way. I just couldn't. Now that that's out of the way, let's see who ended up being the biggest stains on this series. The first entry on this list comes from that relatively unknown game, Portable Ops. Portable Ops has its flaws. It was trying soldier-catcher mechanics and base management before Peace Walker was even a gleam in Kojima's eye, and it was complicated, time-consuming, and ultimately annoying as all hell. But the story was good as a simple military plotline. However, one of the bosses was absolutely dreadful, and that was Python. Python was one of Gene's mercenaries that he hired to help him with his plan. A man who was struck down by a disaster and now can only live by ripping off Mr. Freeze's shtick. He lives in a liquid nitrogen suit, and the blatant copying is one thing, but Kojima thought to give Python this entire backstory about how he and Big Boss were brothers in arms during the Vietnam War, and he was abandoned by him and now he wants revenge. The problem is that we've never seen this guy before. You can't write a backstory to a character based on the protagonist's memories when he's coming out of thin air. The battle's even worse. The arena that it takes place in is covered entirely by a mist because Python needs that stuff to continue living, so it's sort of important. So, because of that, there's no line of sight and thus no targeting. So if you lose him in this dense fog, your ass is grass. Python will get some cheap shots on you because you can't see where he comes from, and his machine gun hits like a steel boot to the nuts. Combine his obscene amount of health with the atrocious concept, and you've got a boss that can only be beaten with all three of your squad and dumb luck. Then, when he's killed, Python's never mentioned again. It's one thing to accidentally create a big-lipped alligator moment, but it's a whole different ballgame when you put all of the team behind it. The only reason this isn't lower is because no one cares about him. Except Big Boss. Every Metal Gear game usually gives us a Liquid Snake as a main villain, and they do their jobs. Taunt the main characters, say they're the best tactician on the planet, and try to kill you multiple times. But when it's their time in the spotlight with their hand on the pump, some of the main villains trip over their apparent super abilities. This was the case for Colonel Vol'jin from Metal Gear Solid 3. Vol'jin was shown throughout the game to be a psychopath and a sadist working for his own selfish needs, so I was really itching to put this rabid dog down, but nuh-uh. His fight is a huge pain in the ass. You end up in a pit with this buff Russian spouting electricity all about himself in a copper bodysuit. Yeah, the setup and the design of Vol'jin looked cool and was all set to be this great final showdown type of thing, but Kojima Productions had no idea what it was doing with him. It's because Vol'jin's battle is a CQC fight. The hand-to-hand combat engine that Kojima Productions sunk a ton of time and money into making it work fluidly and open for some tactical use, but the problem is that MGS3 never tells you how to use it. Do you see how this wouldn't work in a battle where one of the boss's attacks is just touching you? The rest of his moveset is even worse. He can attack you with a spray of bullets, add lightning to his punch combos, and create a force field half the fight. Then there's Major Ocelot, who joined Big Boss's side in a real heartwarming moment that made his character a lot stronger before the end of the game, but the way he helped is completely useless. He throws ammunition in the pit despite this battle being required hand-to-hand. Are you blind, Ocelot? Toss me in some freaking rations, that would help no matter what the case. Vol'jin should have been the greatest thing in the world, but when you make his weakness weapon something we've never used before, it turns him into a complete joke who will only kill you because the designers forgot to send you to self-defense training. I can love Metal Gear for retro or for modern, but there were some bad concepts for bosses circling the original game. The Hind battle was one of those stinkers. I doubt that the designers actually sat at a table and thought about this boss for more than 2 seconds because it makes no fucking sense. Who the hell decided that, yeah, putting a running helicopter sitting on the roof and not moving makes total sense for something acting as a stationary turret? As long as Solid Snake never stands in front of the Hind, it'll never attack you because it doesn't move. This thing has a giant safe space that is so completely obvious for attacking that why bother having it there? It's a stupid boss that has no reason to exist because it can only attack in one direction, and that direction you don't actually start the battle in. For someone with the military mind of Big Boss, this has to be one of the most retarded answers for security ever devised. This battle is so bad that when Ultra Games did the NES port for it, it was cut and replaced with Twin Shot, which definitely did the job a lot better. In a game full of well-done homages and nods to the past games, how in the world do you fuck up the reintroduction of the fans' favorite villain, Psycho Mantis? Well, you start with the nod to Psycho Mantis, fill the rest with nonsense, and puree to get the Screaming Mantis fight. This failure's only point in the game is to show up and say, hey, remember the Psycho Mantis boss from Metal Gear Solid and how he was 17 times better than me? You brought back Psycho Mantis as a ghost just to have him control her even though she had psychic powers in the first place. The concept of the fight is a complete disaster that only wants to wallow in the past and not actually add anything. Screaming Mantis is so busy not caring about being a boss that she starts the battle indestructible and fights you only using her goon corpses. There's no effort here to do anything. She's a puzzle boss with a stupid weakness that you can only find on accident. It's her voodoo dolls. All her powers, all her mental abilities are trapped in these 2 little voodoo dolls that once you grab and flail them at Screaming Mantis for 5 seconds, she dies. Yeah, 2 hits from her own weapons and she drops dead. What a waste. With a team who reintroduced Sniper Wolf and Metal Gear Rex, how did Psycho Mantis get the shaft when he's everybody's favorite? The next entrant for this list comes to us from Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker as one of the AI core drones, the attack robots that function when connected to an AI core, and the most abhorrent is hands down Chrysalis, the air attack drone. It had a great design and a concept that could have been explored if it was done by someone who had a brain, but I balk when Chrysalis was built to be a constant rain of grenades from the sky. This thing is horribly difficult for no reason since Pupa and Cocoon were fair fights. But no, this flying fucknut has all the health of a freaking boulder, and it's too hard to hit in the first place since anytime you're out in the open waiting for your chance, it'll immediately bomb you into next Tuesday, and then it's behind you and you get blasted again. Yeah, Chrysalis picked up Python's old trick and spends half of its time in the clouds. Plus, it's so far away from the battlefield that getting accurate is impossible. Chrysalis is a terrible boss for all the reasons, because it takes away the one thing that a shooter needs to work, being able to retaliate, and it's kinda hard to do that when this thing's explosions are able to take you out behind cover and destroy a third of your health bar. Seriously, fuck this boss. The next boss put together without common sense is coincidentally the most iconic thing in the whole series, especially when it comes from nostalgia bait Metal Gear Solid. It's Metal Gear Rex. This fight is a total insult because the entire game was built around this Metal Gear. We had to sneak around through 4 parts of the island to even get to it. We had to gather 3 keys to even start it up. We endured Liquid Snake murdering our master just to get close to his goal of revenge, and after 20 hours of beating bosses and stealing intel and knocking out generic dudes, it was time to destroy it, and it sucks. Rex is so unfair to fight because the arena has no cover, and even if it has cover, Rex will just blow it up or stomp on it. Also, the arena may have one ration in it, plus Metal Gear Rex has 2 full health bars between stages, and if you die in the second half, there's also a non-skippable cutscene that runs for 3 minutes, smack dab in the middle, so it just makes it all the more irritating when you have to start over again. What's worse is how difficult it actually is to use the weakness weapon. This boss requires the Stinger missile launcher to be defeated, and you can't move while firing it. And Rex attacks so much that it's 7 seconds between you and losing 20% of your health because Rex moves slightly and the target doesn't work anymore, and then you got shot with a missile. This battle had the potential to be great, but with the amount of bullshit it shovels onto the player multiple times, the glory-filled showdown was boiled down to a coma-inducing anger fight, which I hate to call a memorable character from the most nostalgic games of the series, but nope. You decided to just stomp me into a pancake instead and piss me off the edge of the cliff. As a namesake of the series, the Metal Gear bosses that Kojima has churned out have actually been pretty decent. There's been around 10 of these disaster drones, and only 2 of them were truly atrocious. There was Rex in the original Metal Gear Solid, and the other one sits at number 9. The original failure, Metal Gear TX-55 from Metal Gear. This thing is such a horrendous retro boss for all the reasons. The worst one is that this is a bipedal, nuclear-equipped battle tank that does not move. The linchpin of Big Boss's entire plan to disrupt global affairs, and it got stuck in a closet until further notice with no one checking on it. You replaced any sort of security with easily dodged laser turrets, and what makes you look stupider, Kojima, is that Big Boss is in the next room preparing for Solid Snake to show up. He knows that he's beating up his fancy robot, but he doesn't do anything about it. How stupid can you get? Not more moronic than its weakness, the plastic explosives that have to be set in a particular pattern. The boss fight doesn't telegraph the pattern, it was actually told to you 2 hours ago when you helped up Dr. Petrovich. The game tells you exactly how to beat TX-55. Once. So the only way that you know how to defeat it is if you wrote down the entire sequence outside of the game. Yes, they seriously wanted you to do this. It's the laziest hardware workaround I've ever seen. So the Metal Gear doesn't move, and you don't have the weakness to beat it, so your option is to guess blindly with no feedback from the game if you're on the right track, and constantly force yourself to die to the laser turrets when you run out of C4. It is that retarded that it actually reminded me of the Boo Beam Trap from Mega Man 2. This boss is the literal namesake of the game that it's in, and you've worked on this one the least. This is inexcusable trash, and you want to know why? Using the same console, you made the Metal Gear D fight 3 years later. What were you thinking? My god, we're not even halfway done with this list yet, and I'm already this pissed off. Screaming Mantis wasn't the only failed homage in MGS4. This one was actually worse, if you can believe that. It's a butchered character reprise as supernatural as the myths of yore. That failed attempt was Vamp from MGS4. Did you guys spend all of the development time on the Rex battle? Because this battle is hackneyed beyond reason. It's weird that they forgot what made Vamp intimidating in the first place. His Transylvanian mystique and his lightning-fast knifings. Vamp moves so quickly during his MGS2 fight that it was actually unnerving even though you were fighting him in a brightly lit water storage tank. And his ability to swim in infinitely dense water made him look even more vampiric. It's a good thing that there's nothing of that in this remake. Kojima fell asleep so hard at the drawing board that they forgot what genre the game that they were putting him in was, and made him the easiest boss in the whole darn thing. Vamp's only attack is to walk slowly around the room in order to shiv Solid Snake. Except that you're fighting him in an aircraft hangar, so as long as you keep backing up, he'll never kill you. Let's not forget that this was the same person that was able to fight off Cyborg Ryan perfectly 3 missions ago. It's because Vamp is actually a puzzle boss, and he's giving you all the time in the world to figure out what his weakness is, except you can't figure out what it is because the game doesn't telegraph it. His weakness hasn't even been mentioned in over 5 hours. It's the syringe. This is a shooter. Why would you pick the syringe as his murder weapon? Sure, it makes sense after the fact that his immortality came from nanobots and the weapon deactivates him, allowing him to be killed, but it's still an incredibly irritating asshole and should have never been in this game so that the player doesn't waste every single item that he's using trying to kill him. This boss is a stupid waste of time because if you play it how it wants, then the Vamp battle amounts to less than 2 minutes, so it's a slap to the face either way. At this point, it's still surprising how badly Kojima can possibly screw up. This lady got pretty low in my regards right after I finished this game, but she got knocked back by some pretty heavy competition. But here in number 7 sits the boss from Metal Gear Solid 3. Now, I won't lie, she plays the most important role in the entire series. She trained Big Boss from his rookie days to master mercenary, and her ways of leadership helped shape the minds of the most major players in the following games. The problem is when you wrap all of this together into a human being, you've essentially created a robot. I don't hate the boss inherently because up until her actual fight, she was an incredibly strong character. She had a unique approach to life, she had frequent appearances, and ultimately served as one of the best mentor villains in all of gaming. Then you go to the white field and holy shit did Kojima drop the ball. This is what happens when you try to force a conflict because this is a prequel. Big Boss enters this battle for no reason. The Shagohod and Vol'jin had both been defeated, so why are we going out of our way to beat the boss when Vol'jin was the unstable villain? This wouldn't feel like such a hackneyed circumstance if it wasn't choking on its own symbolism and artificial valor. The main thread of the game is destroyed, so having bosses show up after that's been taken away makes it feel like we're just wrapping up a loose end because the writers needed it to, when the boss could have easily just left the situation entirely and lived the rest of her life under one of the 18 aliases she's gotten working as a legendary mercenary. The setup was so atrocious that it was only overshadowed by the battle itself. For symbology's sake, the boss is programmed to be able to dodge all gunshots unless she gets combo booted to the ground. So again, the game forces you to have a CQC battle. The game still never trained us on how to use hand-to-hand system, so how in bloody hell is the player supposed to be a master at it? Most of the battle amounts to both Big Boss and the boss running at each other and mashing attack buttons hoping that they get the number generator's favor and throw their opponent into the dirt. And it's a dire shame for the designers because they put a ton of effort into creating a fluid and well-animated combat system. But it's like having the world's most powerful submarine. Objectively, it might be the best toy in the whole box, but since I have no idea of how to drive it, why the fuck should I care about the stupid submarine? In the end, the boss's rival battle ended up being the most bloated and artificial point in the entire series, trying to overly use symbolism and military service to create a touchy-feely moment of Lassie proportions. They gave it every chance to be successful, used the best soundtrack in the game, but it's all pointless when you don't tell us how to win the fight. It's an incredibly irritating shredding of potential. You know, between the top and bottom lists for this series, this game has almost had total exposure, but it should be for the right reasons. Not because another of its rogues gallery fell to number 6 most atrocious. Here's another boss that comes in with a great design and an innovative arena and decent setup, since we ended up being trapped in this abandoned building when the PMCs decided to invade. There's not a lot of games that would have been able to manage a battlefield that's 3 stories tall. Kinda remind me of MGS5 in a lot of ways. Anyway, this fight sucks ass. Its difficulty is shot through the roof, and I have no idea why. Raging Raven employs a metric ton of decoy jetpackers that only serve as clone distractions in finding her, which is irritating, but not compared to Raging Raven's ability to just carpet bomb an entire floor of the building. Amazing it hadn't turned into rubble considering she does that, and keeps busting in through the walls. This boss is such a tank that a literal sniper round to her face took off the same amount of health than a round from the P90. It's ridiculous to the point that this battle took 10 attempts and over 40 minutes to get the win, all the while dodging her minions and her missiles, which can still hurt you behind cover, since that's always a brilliant way to piss me off. Raging Raven may be cool looking and the most powerful of the war beasts, but she's still a giant obstacle put in the middle of the game designed to be a revolving door of death. Also, she has a beauty phase that walks towards you seductively, forgetting that we're playing MGS4, not God Hand. Well, we're getting into the final stretch here, and I have one eyebrow left and most of the hair on the left side of my head. The last 10 were the easy ones, since they had redeeming factors. The boss was an important character, TX55 was the final battle, and Vamp was just fan service. But the next bosses have nothing. They're failures inside and out. What better way to start than with the most illogical final boss of the entire series, the supercomputer from Metal Gear for the NES. I don't even know with this thing. Where in the hell in a handbasket do you even come up with this moronic idea to the point that the concept is a plot hole? Get this. The supercomputer is the device that has total control over the Metal Gear off-screen that Big Boss is using for his master plan. So why did he station only one guard to protect it? I'd understand this if there were security cameras constantly letting in guards, but no, this important plot device is stationed with a single human being and nothing else comes in the room. Follow that up by stringing it up with 20 rounds of C4 and you're done. That's it. Nobody else came in. Big Boss is in the next room knowing that you were coming, didn't prepare for it, or even care that his Metal Gear was getting destroyed. Big Boss, you idiot! The supercomputer could have been replaced with a self-destruct button and it would have been the exact same bucket of stupid. How did no one at Ultra Games look at this thing and say it was terrible? I said the same thing about the next boss. I have no words for this boss battle. It's the stupidest thing put in the retro Metal Gears right behind Metal Gear 2's Owl Puzzle. This boss appears 5 seconds after another boss battle, so why does it exist when you were protecting the building with a tank? And yet you didn't realize that thing's mere existence is a plot hole because the pilot can't survive in an unventilated room. It's a boss fight that lasts 20 seconds, and even the battle itself is pointless because you can exit anytime you want due to the door you came in never having a lock. If you touch it, you immediately die, so all it amounts to is lobbing a bunch of grenades at it and hoping against hope that you can hit it in time so that you can continue your mission. Yep, it's a big lift alligator moment in a game of boss fights that barely crack 1 minute. That's commitment to failure. Bad bosses come from a lot of retro games simply because they don't age well, but that doesn't mean the atrocities are limited to an age difference. Some of them come from having a concept that no one thought of at all, and that's how you get the Fireman battle from Metal Gear Solid 5. Coincidentally, the bosses who were the only ones in the intro got the worst battle of the entire non-existent Rogues Gallery, since Tretage and the Fireman doubled up to try and torch Big Boss when he started snooping around about Skullface's biological weapon. Then you obliterate his potential and reduce him to a shitty puzzle boss. Puzzle bosses don't work because they're built using adventure game logic from the moon, but this one is particularly horrendous since the puzzle involves environmental combat the game doesn't tell you. They technically give you a hint about beating him. He's a man made from fire and this warehouse is surrounded by water towers. So hitting all 3 of them should kill him, right? No, they only stun the fireman and leave the player wondering what the fuck they should be doing against a guy who is barely trying to kill them. It's the war beauty thing again, where we're fighting an enemy in a shooter who can only walk slowly. The only way to beat this guy is the asinine part because you have to lure the fireman into the evaporation pool nearby and then blow it up with a propane tank so he dissolves in it. And forgive me for thinking that I could extinguish a living blaze using a water water source that's only shin high. This boss was the literal reincarnation of both Colonel Fulgent and Psycho Manus. How could you not make this work? It's a story mission too, so you are forced to do this because fuck replay value. Ugh. We've got 2 more of these chumps left. Just kill me now. Now, unlike my top 15 Metal Gear list, I managed to shock myself and found one that managed to outdo the most infamous of the entire series, which is why number 2 ended up being Solid as Snake from Metal Gear Solid 2. Yes, really, this boss is still an irredeemable atrocity in his own right, despite finding a worse one. He's the worst antagonist of the entire series, being nothing beyond bland, trying to raise the stakes using a lie that the audience wouldn't buy unless they had spontaneous amnesia, and right before this battle, the boss gets outed as a puppet unwittingly doing the bidding of the more powerful patriots. So we have a battle with no stakes against a man whose only trait is being controlled by others. The fight would have been a simple bout of boredom if it wasn't for what actually makes this an atrocity. It's a boss that has to be taken down with the sword, since Ryan lost all of his guns in an off-screen crash. The sword was introduced the last time that Ryan found Solid Snake, and beyond the initial terrible tutorial, where I was stuck for 30 minutes randomly swinging it and accidentally killing Solid Snake until the game let me out of this odd prison. So with that, we have to defeat a guy who has a Doc Ock backpack, 2 swords, and his iconic flaming shoes. Seriously, why the fuck does this guy have the ability to set half of the battlefield on fire? Why? It's even less choreographed than the boss's showdown, since slicing with the sword feels like we're wielding a feather duster and there's barely feedback for getting hits in, and nothing staggers this guy, so the fight requires you to get in close, you have no idea if you're hitting him or not, and the bad guy will hit you while you're in mid-combo taking a bunch of health. And after cutting through the bullshit and lucking out in a beat of him, the guy has the gall to be beaten by landing in a New York trash can. But if this guy is the famous black mark of the series, who possibly beat him? Well, before we reveal the all-important number 1, let's recap this horror show. Number 15, Captain Nobody. Number 14, Elec Man's cousin second removed. Number 13, a running helicopter on the roof. Number 12, Remember the Mantis. Number 11, the air attack drone from hell. Number 10, Metal Godzilla. Number 9, who's driving this fucking thing? Number 8, third time's the charm. Number 7, you're not the boss of me. Number 6, anger management. Number 5, the world's worst solitaire machine. Number 4, lawsuit waiting to happen. Number 3, the flamiest flaming flamer that ever burned. And number 2, the big guy himself. And now, we come to the biggest loser of them all. The Nagmachon Tank from Snake's Revenge. Yes, the worst boss in the whole Metal Gear pie came from one of its goofy spin-offs, which wasn't that bad for a mistakenly licensed sequel to a port, but this mechanical menace is the most moronically aggravating boss I've ever had the unfortunate incident to fight. I cannot even begin with this fucking thing. It wasn't that hard of a job. The original Metal Gear managed to make a tank boss that worked well in spite of its dullness, but this has to be some sort of record. It's the worst example of innovation since modern Sonic, because this boss somehow had the most tech implanted into it, and yet none of it works. Even worse, it's directly hazardous to your health. It had to be difficult to get a boss to have behavior off-screen in the NES days, because the Nagmachon tries to, for some reason. The idea is that the Nagmachon runs in a pattern between 3 bridge screens, and you need to kill it with landmines. It's usual fare and could have worked if it had a pattern. This thing doesn't. It moves randomly. With this type of boss that moves off screen, a pattern was essential for it to work. Yeah, you would have died a bunch, yet you would have figured out its behavior and then you could kill it. Now you can't do that because when you set up landmines thinking it's at the top and suddenly it doubled back, you get hit with an insta-kill hitbox again, and then you want to kill your controller out of spite. Somehow this thing manages to run in a pattern and move randomly at the same time. How do you even do that? It gets so bad that it was taunting me after the first 10 deaths. I don't despise Ultra games like N-Space because they have shown some good sides, but this boss is where they've gotten to their worst by trying to be edgier than everyone else, and it only ended up embarrassing themselves. This may be a boss from a spin-off, but that doesn't excuse how illogical it is, and I'm gonna call it out every time I get to, because it's an irredeemable piece of crap and the worst that this series has ever done. I'm Kaz the Bosscinerator, and thanks for joining me on this journey through Kojima's garbage. And in spite of all of these awful examples of set pieces, the series has gone on to be a classic through its 25-year run, and I love it through and through. I'll see you guys next time, and remember, victory for gamers.